Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to an in-depth review on Days Gone, the latest big PlayStation exclusive to hit the market. It's also a game that unfortunately just so happens to be a part of a genre that feels as if it's been done to death at this point. I mean, let's face it, the list of zombie games out there goes on, but yet here I am still buying into them. So perhaps it's safe to say that with the exception of games like The Last of Us, the genre still has yet to reach its full potential. So what about Days Gone then? Where does it play into all of this? Does it take a refreshing enough spin on things to reach that metaphorical peak? Does it truly do enough to stick out and stand with the genre's finest? Or is it, as they say, just another zombie game in a genre that, much like its characters, refuses to die? To answer that question, we'll kick things off by jumping into the visuals. Days Gone takes place within post-apocalyptic Oregon, and spans across a huge map that encompasses a vast array of dense forests, dry canyons, and snowy mountains. Together, the culmination of it all does an excellent job at helping the game capture the unique feeling of the Pacific Northwest. It's the place where I've had the pleasure to grow up and spend summers camping, and not only does it feel accurately portrayed here, minus the whole everything being destroyed part, but that in and of itself is kind of what makes exploring this world so interesting. Simply getting to see what it all looks like after the world's gone to hell is honestly a treat in its own right. While riding around, you'll have the opportunity to sift through abandoned motels, deserted schools, and entire ghost towns that have been completely decimated by the outbreak. What's neat is that despite having seen this sort of destruction played out so many times before, whether it be in another zombie game or even something like the Fallout series, it still manages to feel special here. And for me, that constant intrigue wasn't just thanks to the game's interesting choice of locations, but also the smaller set pieces that they use to help tell a story within many of those same areas. Weather in Days Gone is also worth mentioning. It's got this surprisingly natural way of coming and going, and all of the different elements have their own realistic side effects that impact the world and its characters. A heavy rain, for example, can work in your favor as it makes it more difficult for enemies to both see and hear you. But on the flip side, makes it more of a challenge when it comes to riding your bike around, as pavement loses its traction and dirt roads turn to mush. Snow in Days Gone is also pretty cool in the sense that unlike most games out there, where snow only falls in places where it already covers the ground, in this one, heavy snows can come in and completely blanket locations where it was previously non-existent. Texture work and lighting in Days Gone are also pretty damn noteworthy too, and while I wouldn't go as far as to say this is the best looking game ever made, I do think that it does enough to hold its own against other graphically impressive games out there, like God of War and Red Dead Redemption. Those moments when you're down in a mine with only a flare to guide you or having a shootout in a dark tunnel with enemy muzzle flashes acting as your only source of light are nearly unmatched, and quite often elevate the visual experience to a whole new level. Some fantastic work here across the board. And now, with the visuals covered, let's go ahead and move on to the gameplay. And we'll start by jumping into what this game is all about. The zombies, also better known in the world of Days Gone as Freakers. Overall, I have to say that there's actually a decent variety here when it comes to the mix of different types of zombies. Of course, you have a few of the typical variants you'd expect to see thanks to games like Left 4 Dead, with breakers feeling very similar to tanks and screamers sort of acting as this game's witch. In fact, you can even hear them humming this creepy tune if you get close enough. It no doubt treads some familiar ground, but even with that said, there are a few new additions that you rarely get to see in these types of games, that I feel helps give Days Gone a leg up over the competition. I won't cover them all for spoilers' sake, but variants like the Newts, for instance, were incredibly refreshing to see. Not only because of their cool traits like being expert climbers and only attacking the player when they sensed weakness, but also because killing them simply felt uncomfortable at times, knowing what they were before the outbreak, which is something I haven't really felt in a game before. On top of that, you've also got infected animals like bears and wolves, and while those are great too, what really sets this game apart and makes it feel like it's truly worth experiencing, in my opinion, are the hordes. Never before in a zombie game have I felt as much fear and adrenaline as I did while trying to survive one of these swarms of death. They're essentially a never-ending flood of bodies, often numbering in the hundreds. They're just as fast as you and can climb just as high. Usually the only way to beat them is to keep moving and to always stay one step ahead. These large masses of freakers are no doubt the bread and butter of this game, but thankfully that hasn't stopped the devs from making the human factions equally fun to deal with. They too come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, and there's this useful feature where enemies will attack your last known position rather than where you currently are. So you have a ton of cool tactics that you can utilize alongside the game's respectable stealth mechanics in order to take down some of the larger groups of enemies. Aside from the isolated battles, there are also plenty of times where you'll end up having to take on both humans and freakers alike. And for me, these were hands down some of the coolest moments I've had in a game like this. Being pinned down by enemy fire only to have the attackers suddenly be wiped out by a wave of freakers simultaneously created this rush of relief and fear that was almost indescribable. Days Gone also features a heavy amount of customization options when it comes to kitting out your character. Alongside the game's skill trees are different survivor encampments that you can engage with that sell a generous amount of different weapons. And while sadly there aren't many attachments for the guns, there are a ton when it comes to the melee weapons, which can range anywhere from hammering a few nails into a baseball bat to screwing in an entire saw blade. And the same can be said when it comes to the motorcycle as well. You can change everything from the paint job all the way down to the soundproofing of the muffler, and even that is just barely scratching the surface. Now, while everything we've talked about so far is all good and dandy, Days Gone is unfortunately held back by some pretty major issues. Combat, for example, can be quite janky at times, especially early on, when you're running around with some of the less effective weapons. And AI can sometimes get caught on objects due to some bad pathing issues. Occasionally, performance is also pretty dang awful, as the game suffers from some nasty lag spikes that seem to stem from riding the motorcycle around. It gets particularly bad when you're riding near hordes, and even worse during storms, sometimes freezing up entirely. The flow of things in general is also broken up far too often by constant progression pop-ups that are overly large and in your face. I would have much preferred it if they had gone with some kind of smaller notification that only appears in the corner of the screen, as what they have now is an unnecessarily obtrusive spectacle that gamifies the whole experience and cuts into your immersion. Overall though, Days Gone is still a lot of fun, and I would even say that it gets a lot right when it comes to moving the genre forward, with things like the zombie variety, and obviously the massive hordes. However, the technical issues here are pretty glaring at times, and no doubt hold the experience back from being as solid as it should be, so do be wary of that. Keeping things moving though, let's check out the sound.
I got a kid here.
What?
Well, I mean, not a kid, a survivor. She's been out here a long time.
You've got a survivor, and you're bringing her to Lost Lake.
No, you're bringing her to Lost Lake. I'm bringing her to you. Ricky, you there?
Yeah, okay. I'm on my way. Lost Lake out.
Ricky? Yeah, okay. You're welcome. Crap! Someone's down!
And we'll go ahead and start with the voice acting. To say they nailed it here would be a bit of an understatement. I don't know whether to praise the actors, the writers, or perhaps both, but at times the voice acting in Days Gone is some of the best I've ever heard in a video game.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. No. Oh, my God.
Hey.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I don't even know. I just was looking in your bag and I
it's all right.
saw that and
Oh.
Oh, my God, I could have killed somebody.
Well,
Oh, shit.
yeah, but you gotta kind of aim it at them first.
I've never done anything like that before.
Hey, it's okay.
I
They're
saw it
gone,
in
they're
your
gone.
bag and I tried to call
You
the
did
police,
good.
but there were no
You know what we're gonna do?
bars,
We're
there was
gonna do?
no reception.
I'm gonna wait right here until your guy comes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've never done anything like that.
Could have fooled me.
Something about it just feels so effortlessly natural and extremely believable, especially when you factor in the game's impressive facial animations. They also do a nice job at applying different filters on top of the audio so that voices or gunshots outside sound a lot different than they do inside of, say, a tunnel, for instance. And speaking of gunshots, firearms in Days Gone sound exceptionally well done. Whether it be a pistol, shotgun, or a rifle, the guns all seem to have just the right amount of crack and echo to them. What's also pretty neat is that suppressors in Days Gone seem to work more along the lines of how they would in real life, in the sense that while they are a lot quieter than normal, enemies can still hear you if you fire too frequently or get too close. And of course, we can't forget about the bike. The motorcycle in Days Gone sounds excellent. The engine noises are nice and gurgly, and it's got this appropriately aggressive sound to it when you're holding the throttle all the way back. In fact, I enjoyed the sound design of the bike so much that I found myself pretty reluctant when it came time to upgrade the exhaust pipe to a more sound dampening version, despite it being more stealthy. On top of that, even the less noticeable noises like the sound of snow crunching into your tires were all notably well done, and made for a remarkably detailed soundscape. As for the music, Days Gone features a very guitar-heavy soundtrack that's sort of a mix between what you might hear in The Last of Us and State of Decay. It's a little all over the place in terms of tone, but it does have something for every moment, be it hopeful, sad, or scary. And while it's far from being my favorite soundtrack out there, for the most part I did enjoy it, and I think that it suited the style of this game and its characters quite well. And now, with the sound covered, and without mentioning any spoilers, let's talk a bit about the story. Days Gone follows the journey of Deacon St. John, a stubborn biker in search of answers regarding the death of his wife. And during your time with Deacon, a character who turns out to be surprisingly witty and enjoyable to play as, you'll drift across the crippled state of Oregon, spending time with different survivor groups who all have their own unique goals and ideologies that set them apart from one another. And you'll notice that they do a really good job at giving their camps some much needed life despite the ever-present danger. You can still come across people telling stories about the old world and what they were doing at the time of the outbreak, as well as people gathering around to listen to a song or two. Moments like these are often very well done, and that's definitely one of the things that stood out to me about Days Gone. Amidst all of the blood and guts, the game still makes room for those nice moments of downtime, where you get to learn more about yourself and other characters while you catch your breath. Something else I noticed is that, be it good or bad, Deacon has a fairly rich history with many of the characters you meet, which helps add some much needed depth to the world of Days Gone and the people you come across.
Go see Alkai. I'll update your credits tonight.
Hey, listen. She's been through a lot. Can we just
Let me worry
take it
about
easy?
how I'm
No,
gonna...
listen to me, okay? Seriously, don't work her like you do everyone else.
Don't tell me how to run my camp. You want to move here? You want to help us run this? Then maybe you get some say. Don't get soft on me, Deke.
The missions when you're out on a run with someone you don't know if you can trust are easily some of the best thanks to that history, and the fact that it's often unclear who you should watch out for more between them and the Freakers. And I love how the game doesn't feel the need to shy away from those darker moments, despite being a little more arcadey at times. Instead, it chooses to embrace them wholeheartedly, and the weight of the story heavily benefits because of it.
Please.
Come on.
Please.
Come on, we gotta go.
No, we're not leaving her to the freaks.
What? No.
We are not leaving.
This is not why we are here. Shake. Yeah, okay. Okay.
Okay.
I got her. Her legs are broken. She ain't going anywhere, bro. We gotta get a move on. Just do it.
Hey, sweetheart. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. Shh. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Even with the solid direction though, the game does suffer from a few repetitive missions here and there. Despite there being somewhat of a narrative excuse for it, I still would have liked to see them mix things up a bit more in terms of design, and just leave all the repetitive stuff for the optional jobs that you can do to increase your reputation with the survivor camps. For For the most part, however, Days Gone does have an unexpectedly well thought out story that features a good amount of twists and turns to keep you guessing along the way. And Deacon ended up feeling very different to your average protagonist, making him a refreshing character to experience the world with. And finally, with the story covered, it's time to give this game a final rating. For me, Days Gone is not just another zombie game. In truth, it's what games like State of Decay could have been, as it's one of the few open-world zombie games done right, thanks to elements like the hordes, interesting locations, and the fact that it doesn't skimp out on its narrative. That said, it's clearly not without its faults. It's got a fair amount of jank to it, and the suspect performance is really disheartening to see in a game of this caliber, thus leaving it at a 7 out of 10 in my book. Again, it's got its problems, but for the most part, the fun it offers might be just enough to look the other way. So, if you're one of those people who still doesn't feel like they've had their zombie itch scratched, Days Gone could be worth picking up despite its drawbacks. On the other hand, if you are on the fence, I'd actually recommend waiting a while longer for a few more updates to roll out to see if some of the game's performance issues ever get resolved. But anyways guys, that's gonna do it for this review. So hopefully you found the video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.